The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. We got another great webinar in store for you guys thanks to Han Lozier, our friends over at Han Lozier. My name is Eric Vitardi over at Foundation Software. And again, I can't thank Han Lozier enough for helping us out. For those of you that were with us last week, we covered the payroll protection program. I know we got a lot of really good responses, a lot of good feedback from everybody who was in on that. And with today, we'll be navigating some of the impacts of COVID-19. You guys will get some new faces here today, but nonetheless, some really good resources over at Han Lozier. So thank you guys again for joining us. And before I flip it over to the team for introductions, I just want to give everybody a heads up that questions will be submitted on the side. We'll try to get to as many as we can during the end of the presentation, but if it's anything like last week, I know we had quite a number of questions, so we'll get to what we can. But if you have any questions following that, we will have the information from everybody at the end of the slide deck here. So feel free to reach out with any questions that you have. And additionally, Han Lozier will be providing a free consultation for Foundation Software and Payroll for Construction clients. So we thank them again for that. And we thank them again for all these resources. I can't thank them enough for doing this. So before I get going here, before we get going here, we'll pass it on over to, maybe we'll start with Mike. Mike, you want to give us a quick introduction?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Pasco. I'm a partner in the litigation and construction practice group at Han Lozier and Parks.
Hey guys, I'm Chad Van Arnhem. I work for the construction service group. I don't actually have a litigation background. I have a construction management background, and I'm working over here at Han Lozier and Parks in our construction services group here.
And I think that leaves just you, Rob, right? I think Rob, you'll be the last intro, and then we can get going with Mike on the first slide after that, after Rob's squared away. Rob, can you hear us? All right. Well, Rob is with us today as well. We'll kick it over to Mike to lead things off on the first slide.
So Eric, the first part of the presentation is Rob, but we can start with the next slide, which is our industry blog that we update on a regular basis. We can go to the next slide, Aaron. The industry blog we have is a publication of our practice group and a collaboration between over 30 professionals across 6 offices throughout the United States, specializing in every aspect of construction law. It's updated regularly. You'll see a number of publications on there on the recent impacts of COVID, payroll protection, and various other topics that are relevant to the industry.
Hey Mike, my audio was back on, so I'm happy to jump in, if that makes sense. Sorry about that, everyone. All of a sudden I lost my audio. So I don't know, Mike, did you have a chance to introduce everybody on the panel?
We all introduced ourselves. Rob, we'll just defer to you to introduce yourself and then kick off the presentation.
Terrific. Well, welcome everyone. I'm sorry about the glitch, but we're on behalf of Han Lozier and Parks, we're very honored to have the opportunity today to give this presentation with our colleagues and partners at Foundation Software. And I did want to personally thank Eric Vitardi at Foundation and Mike Odie for giving us the opportunity to work with them on this. And I also want to thank our internal marketing director at Han Lozier and Parks, who you aren't seeing on the screen, but who is advancing the slides for us as we go, Erin Hawk, who she's done a wonderful job on this and the prior presentation that we gave, and is already fast at work on the last in the series, which will happen next week, as Eric said. So thank you again, and thank you again, Foundation. Erin, you can flip to the next slide if you want to. So today we wanted to talk to you about three aspects of what's going on with COVID and how it's impacting our industry. And our focus today is going to be on the concerns of contractors and subcontractors. We think that obviously the very audience that we know would be on or is on the phone with us, and the audience that is obviously primarily our client base with our construction group at Hahn Lozier and Parks. So specifically, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you should expect in this era of COVID, and particularly what you should expect as being part of the construction industry. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about, and Aaron, you can go ahead and advance the slide. Aaron, if you can click. I'm going to talk about how do you protect your company? Obviously, a key aspect of what you need to be thinking about is what do I need to do to safeguard myself going forward to take me out of this crisis and back into normal business. And then finally, we're going to talk about tracking project costs associated with COVID. And that's where, in large part, our colleague Chad Van Arnhem is going to come in to play, and you'll hear from Chad with respect to that. Mike, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to the audience, but Chad is part of our construction services group. He's not a lawyer, much better. Chad is an experienced project manager, came to us, he was with Turner for 10 years in their special projects division, and then came to us after a 2-year stint with Sodexo building projects at University Hospital here in Cleveland, Ohio. And Chad's going to talk specifically about tracking project costs associated with COVID. So I think it'll be both interesting and informative, a portion of the program. So, all right, let's start with talking about what you should expect. And Aaron, you can go ahead and advance the slides. What should you expect? Well, the first thing that we've been telling people is that's really the $64,000 question, right? And the answer, an answer that I always hate to give to clients as a lawyer, but it is truly the answer here today, which is it really depends. There is no one size fits all with respect to what's happening here, both as it relates to a particular company and or for a particular project. There are a lot of variables, and a lot of those variables are completely and totally outside of your control. How long is the shutdown going to be? Are you shut down in your region where your projects are? How long is the ramp up going to take? What are the government restrictions going to be? And it's a moving target. We yesterday did a presentation like this, and we informed the folks that were on this presentation from Ohio that the governor had required now, that they're going to be have to have face masks worn in the workplace. Within 3 or 4 hours, he reversed himself and said, "Well, that's going to be not going to be mandatory. It's going to be suggested or recommended." So it's going to be. It continues to be a moving target, a target with which and by which you're going to ultimately have to comply as a business. You can't control whether or not somebody gets sick within your business or on one of your sites. It's going to impact how you're going to proceed. And the list goes on and on and on with respect to things you can't control. But what we're going to talk about today, what I'm going to talk about, what Mike's going to talk about, and what Chad is going to talk about are the things that you can control. Because taking that at least gives you the best possible opportunity to come through this crisis and come out the other side solid and hopefully ready to go and to make the most of what's been a tough year, at least the last couple of months. So that's where our focus is going to be today. Aaron, if you want to go ahead and move it to the next slide. So what to expect? The other part of this that I've been saying to our clients is, and you can go ahead and advance the next two, Aaron, is you got to plan for the worst. Whoops, I'm sorry, I sent you too far. Even as recent as yesterday and the day before, the AIA index has come out with an article that was in Construction Dive, points to major turn down in commercial construction. Recently, the Associated Builders and Contractors chief economist forecast a steep decline. So I'm saying to our clients, you need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And hopefully that with some planning and some guarding with respect to things that you can control in your business and on your projects will ultimately put you in the best position to survive this and continue on as a profitable entity. So Aaron, go ahead and flip to the next slide. Thank you. So we'll start with, I'm going to talk about kind of 5 different areas of sort of what you should expect. And I realize, and I want you to know that I realize that now that we're into this for 2 months, some or all of these points may be things that you have already considered and or acted on for your respective employee or your company. But I think they're all worth reviewing and going over. And particularly when we get to the last item, which is claims, that's an aspect that I think things have started to gel. We're starting to understand some of these things. And then Mike is going to take you through just the whole issue of project impacts, how COVID's impacting projects, what you should be considering and what you should be doing. But these are the sort of these bullet points are the next points that I'm going to talk through as part of my presentation before I hand it off to Mike. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. We're going to talk about immediate cash flow impacts, shortage of reliable labor, supply chain problems, project cancellation and termination, and then some issues with claims. And then I'll turn it over to Mike, who can then talk more specific about project impacts and claims, specifically as it relates to COVID. So Aaron, you can go ahead and flip to the next slide, please. So immediate cash flow impact. You need to be planning for an immediate impact to your cash flow. If it hasn't hit you, it's going to hit you, or you have to plan for it to hit you. You know, we are telling our clients, if you haven't already, consider drawing down on your line of credit, put some money in your account to make sure that you have it to the extent that you're going to need it to bridge, you know, periods of downturn in production. Stimulus loan, we did our first in this series of presentations, and many of you may have been on the line for that. Our partner Ivan Golden in our Chicago office and John Paul Lucci here in Cleveland, together with the CPA from Intillis Advisors, Suha Shah. Mr. Shah also has a long-standing relationship with Foundation Software out of Baltimore, Maryland, gave a presentation not really geared towards applying for the Payroll Protection Plan or SBA stimulus loans, but how to navigate those. And I am specifically saying to people how to maximize forgiveness, because that's part of what you want to be doing here, is how do I make sure that as much as possible of the loans that I'm taking are just going to be forgiven. One of the things that we learned last evening with respect to the stimulus loans is that the Treasury has now announced that all loans in excess of $2 million will be audited. An amazing undertaking from my perspective, and I'm still interested in exactly how the government thinks they're going to do that. But I think it's important for all of you to know that to the extent that you have, and I hope you all have taken advantage of the stimulus loan options that the government has put out there, that you also are paying attention, close attention with respect to how to navigate those loans, how they need to be applied, what you can and can't do with respect to both those loans and to maximize forgiveness of those loans in the long term. And if you haven't, I believe that Eric has that presentation recorded, and you can find that at your Foundation Connection and listen to it. And I would encourage you to do that. We had a great turnout. It was an excellent program. And I think this is an important aspect of what you need to be thinking about in terms of, managing your immediate or plans for a potential impact to your cash flow. Aggressive collections and pursuing aged receivables. It sounds obvious, but you're going to hear a lot of things from me over the course of my presentation about enhancing activities like this. And frankly, my view is that I'm hoping a lot of the habits that we're telling you to get into right now, because we're in a crisis mode and you need to batten down the hatches and be ready for potential problems and potential issues like impact to your cash flow, that it will put you in a position as a business or as a part of a business that you are actually picking up and pursuing good business practices that will help you long beyond the point of this crisis. So looking at and enhancing and driving aggressive collection activity now, looking at aged receivables, focusing on those, and pursuing aged receivables, an important aspect of what you should be doing right now in an attempt to minimize the impact of a potential cash flow problem down the road. Extend payables. It's not just about going after money that's owed. It's about conserving your cash. Extend payables where you can extend those. Evaluate what you need to pay versus what you don't have to pay. What are you obligated to pay versus what you aren't obligated to pay? Those kinds of things, again, need to be given an enhanced focus in today's world, and hopefully are things that you will carry on beyond the crisis. Aaron, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So when I talk about some of the issues with respect to protecting the company, I like to just remind all of you in the construction business, sort of start by getting down to basics. How do we make money in this industry? We make money by making progress on projects, right? By building the buildings we build, by installing the equipment we install, by doing the work that we do on every project. That's how we make our money. So, item number one is keep making progress on ongoing projects, okay? Make sure that they are moving forward. I put the second bullet point in here because I think going forward, to avoid any potential slowdown or impact to making that progress, you need to be absolutely sure that you are complying with the CDC guidelines. And not just the CDC guidelines, but the local and state orders that impact your specific business or that impact the location of where your projects are. Keeping up to date with that and ensuring strict compliance is an important aspect of making sure that you are putting yourself in the best possible position to protect your company going forward. Enhanced tracking of receivables, pay application requirements, lien waivers. Again, the point here is to put yourself in the best possible position to make sure that you're going to get paid on the projects that you're driving forward, and you're going to get paid timely, and those payments are not going to be hung up by issues with respect to your pay applications, your lien waivers, your lien releases. And it all starts with making an effort to have an enhanced focus on those activities. Something maybe you haven't had to do in the past, but maybe you should be thinking about now, is looking for every single opportunity and option to pursue the early release of retention on a project. Can you go to your upstream contractor or your owner and say, look, we're 75% done, and yeah, you don't have to release retention under the terms of our contract, until substantial completion, but, we're 75% done, the project's going well, will you release half now and the other half at substantial completion? There are all kinds of options that potentially you should be thinking about. And of course, the next option is don't sign a contract that doesn't allow you to get a rolling release of retention on some level earlier than substantial completion, right? And the same with respect to your downstream subcontractors, to the extent that you're working with downstream subcontractors. You know, maybe you'll have the opportunity to get a release of retention that you can share with them. And if you don't share it with them, maybe you have the opportunity to bring that cash in and hold it until you have the requirement to release the retention done downstream, all depending upon whatever the applicable prompt pay requirements are governing a particular project that you have. But all things that you should be thinking about, and again, I'll use the word enhanced thought with respect to how can I bring this cash in earlier as opposed to later. Timely pursuit of mechanics liens and bond rights on a public project or a bonded project where you have any concern or you're running into a situation where you're concerned that your lien rights may lapse. We say this all the time in just specific presentations that we give to our clients, our construction clients, and generally when we talk about mechanics lien and bond rights, period. There is virtually no other industry that I'm aware of after 30 years of practicing law where you have the right as a company to go in without any due process whatsoever, without ever speaking to a judge, without ever, filing a pleading with a lawyer, and actually lien someone's property, right? As contractors, you have that right on the projects that you're on. It is a unique right, and sometimes it is always amazing to us that those rights are not much more carefully guided. And sometimes we'll have people say, well, I only do it on projects where I've owed more than $50,000. And, our response to that is, those are the ones you need to be doing it on, because those are the ones where filing a lawsuit, you're never going to have that make sense economically, right? Filing a lawsuit over $50,000, you're going to eat too much of that up in potential collection costs and attorney's fees, right? The $5,000, the $10,000, the $20,000 issues, those are the ones, file that lien, because that ultimately will ensure that you're going to get paid, and will likely ensure that you're going to get paid 100 cents on the dollar. Strictly enforced pay if paid rights. Again, conserving cash. If you don't have those in your contracts, those requirements, you should. They aren't enforceable in all states. For the people that are on this presentation from New York, pay if paid provisions are not enforceable. So unfortunately, they aren't going to give you the option of saying, well, I don't have to pay you downstream subcontractor until I get paid. But in many states they are, and they're strictly enforced in many states. And for people in those states, it is an important aspect of what should be in your contract, and it's something that you need to, particularly in today's environment, take advantage of. Don't overpay your subcontractors. Conserve that cash. And then my seventh point here is minimizing scope. Minimizing scope creep. In today's environment in particular, there is no time, and Aaron, you can advance to that slide in a minute. No time to give away work. Okay, on jobs before where you might have said, well, something, the scope is creeped up, but we're just going to take care of it. Don't do it. Draw the line. Today's environment is actually a good excuse to say, something, before I might have just let this go, but I just can't let this go in this environment. I need to be paid for it, or we just really can't do it. Minimize your scope creep, and again, give enhanced focus to that. I think, and particularly for a lot of the bigger contractors we represent, we're constantly reminding them that if you really focus on these issues, you would be amazed at how much money you can recover. If your project managers are out there really paying attention, giving enhanced focus to exactly what we're doing in the field and exactly what we're doing in terms of our scope of work, you would be amazed at how often you'd find that there really are significant amounts of additional work that you're doing that you're not being compensated for, and that you have the right to be compensated for under the terms of your contract. So think about giving an enhanced focus to minimizing any potential scope creep on your projects. Okay, Aaron, you can go to the next slide. So this is the scarier part of my presentation, because I'm going to talk about something that frankly is not something that I have a great expertise in, but something that I think it is important for all of you to be thinking about and considering, at least if you are managing a material on a project, and that is supply chain management. We are in an environment where we don't know what this crisis is going to completely do with respect to our supply chain, with respect to the materials that we're providing on site. A lot of the articles that I've read from, I think, very credible sources have indicated that it's probably likely to be more of a short-term issue. It's not going to be long-term, but that short-term for you could be critical. What you hear out generally in the industry is what you would expect. You know, some of your suppliers are going to be very prepared. They're going to have, again, enhanced their vision into how they're going to get their products and who they're going to provide them to, and they're going to know how to prioritize those things. Some are not. And those are the ones that you need to be concerned about. And those are the ones that you need to know which are which, so that, you know, if there's a vulnerability, you can preempt that or put yourself in a position where you're not going to be surprised. So again, it's visibility and enhanced visibility into where your materials are coming from, who you're dealing with, and are there any vulnerabilities with respect to that? And it may actually mean that you're going to have your people on the phone talking to your crucial suppliers saying, okay, I want to know where your products are. I want to know how you're getting them. I want to understand what you have in your inventory. And I want to understand if you have any issues whatsoever with respect to how, you know, the availability of these products. Get that assurance up front. And if you can't get it, then you need to recognize, I may have an issue, and you're going to want to be prepared to have a plan in place to preempt a potential crucial issue on a project. Same goes for workforce. And Aaron, you can go to the next slide. And labor. You should have a workforce labor plan. Again, enhanced focus on what am I doing with my workforce? Do I have any issues? Should I be forecasting any issues? And have a plan with respect to those issues, so that if you identify potential problems, you've got a plan for where you're going to need to go. You know, and I mentioned this earlier in my next bullet point. Part of this is scrutinizing your key suppliers and going through all the questions that I'm asking. And to me, probably the most important one is the last question I'm asking here, which is, are you a priority? If you have crucial suppliers and you don't think you're going to be a priority, think about what your plan B should be, or find somebody who you know will be making you a priority. Okay, Aaron, you can go to the next bullet. And we've talked about this, again, identifying and implementing a plan with respect to those vulnerable suppliers. So looking and figuring out, in the next bullet kind of goes to the same point, which is just generally extending your supply network. And again, this kind of goes to the point that I've been making throughout my presentation, which is some of these practices, frankly, are just good business practices that if you haven't been doing this, get yourself in the habit now to do it in a crisis situation, but don't stop. Keep doing that. Extend your supply network, identify potential issues, make sure you have alternate arrangements for potentially vulnerable suppliers that are key or crucial to you or a specific project. You know, and then finally, and I referenced this earlier, but it's important to check into and look at, you know, what's your supplier's inventory? What are their production schedules? What is their shipment status? Ask those questions. And if you don't get the answers you want to hear or that cause you any concern, then it's time to really think about, okay, what should I be doing to make sure that I'm being proactive and preventing or preempting any potential issues. So, you know, I would wrap this whole issue up, and Aaron, you can go to the next slide, by saying, implement a process to monitor labor supply, labor and supply chain issues, predict and preempt, immediately investigate slowdowns and material suppliers and subcontractors where you think there's a potential viability issue. All, I think, key things to keep in mind and implement to protect your company, in this, during the course of this crisis, and then I think beyond. The next thing I want to talk about with respect to protecting your company is planning for the potential project shutdown. And we're dealing with a number of those these days. Owners, public and private, frankly, that are trying to evaluate, okay, where's the project going to go? Do we have the ability to fund the project completely? And what we're telling our contractors are, look, you know your projects and your backlog better than anybody, right? Nobody knows it better than you. If you're dealing with an owner that you're familiar with and you're comfortable with respect to their ability to fund that project, that's great. That's what you want. And then go right back to my slide that said, move forward, keep the progress moving on that project. Don't let up on the gas, get those progress payments coming in, move forward. But where you don't have that confidence level, that's where you need to, again, pay close attention. Enhanced visibility with respect to what's that owner's ability. And you have the right, okay, when you've got a contract, to demand of your client, whether it's an upstream contractor or whether it's an owner, I want to know, I want you to give me adequate financial assurance that you can fund this project. And if they refuse or they don't give you what you need, that's red flag number one, okay? And if you're at a burn rate on that project, you better quickly take measures, not to necessarily put yourself in a situation where you're going to be considered to be in default yet, but to measure, to slow that down, right? To make, clear decisions with respect to what materials am I going to purchase right now? What don't I have to purchase? How can I slow walk this a little bit until I can be comfortable that I'm going to get and my subcontractors are going to get paid? And if you don't get that financial assurance and you don't get the right response, then you really have to evaluate whether or not you have options to suspend or terminate that contract. That's where you're going to want to consult a legal professional to talk to you about what your rights are, either under your contract or under the law. Because there are things like anticipatory breach of contract. If I ask you, I need you to tell me that you can pay me, and you can't assure me that you can, the law says that potentially is an anticipatory breach of contract that could give you the option to stop. Okay, you need to talk to your lawyer. You need to make sure you know what your rights are. But you know something? If you're faced with a situation where you could be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions, and we've had clients just like that where it's a million plus a month in a burn rate, putting the brakes on is key, and paying attention to those issues is key. So keep an eye out, have enhanced visibility with respect to potential vulnerabilities with any owner's ability to pay or upstream contractor. Evaluate and understand your rights with respect to project suspension. Every AIA standard, A201, gives the contractor, unless it's been modified, the right to suspend the project under certain circumstances. Understand what those rights are and learn going forward that if you don't have those rights, those are good things to include in your contract documents, so when you have issues like this, you're not stuck. Review your rights to compensation for termination for convenience. Where you're really concerned and the owner's not giving you what you want, one option is, I don't want to breach the contract or take that risk. I want to get a termination for convenience. And talking to the owner about termination for convenience. Let's negotiate a termination for convenience. Get me off this project. What are my rights if that happens? What do I have the right to be paid? What do I have to do with my downstream contractors? What equipment and supplies can I cancel? And where will I be left? And those are all things that you'll want to evaluate. But again, in the face of a potentially a burn rate that's just going to put you in a bad situation versus stopping it now and moving on to a profitable project, those are the things you want to be considering now to be proactive and avoid those situations, particularly in a crisis, but then our hope would be that long term, you carry that into your regular business practices so that you're protecting yourself on every project, even in a situation where we have a normal or a hopefully more normal work environment. Okay, Aaron, you can go to the next slide. So my last part, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike. I want to talk a little bit about effective claim management program, and Mike's going to have the bulk of this, but I'm going to specifically talk about one aspect, and that is we get a lot of questions already about what happens and what's my liability if one of my workers becomes infected with COVID-19. Am I liable for that? You know, and the answer is it's going to depend on the jurisdiction. I think it's going to depend a lot on what happens and unfolds over the next couple of months. So I can't really give you necessarily an absolute answer with respect to that, but what I can tell you is this, that if you fully comply with all of the CDC and the local and the state safety requirements, okay, with respect to a safe job place, a safe work environment, as it relates to COVID-19, okay, you will be in the best possible position to avoid any potential liability in that regard. So what does that mean? That means that you want to make sure that you have documented and put in place all safety measures, social distancing, available sanitizer, you know, masks if they're required, everything that would be required locally, and then including potential temperature taking. And then beyond that, you want to make sure that if someone does get infected, that you're reacting correctly. CDC requires, if you have somebody that's infected, the first thing you got to do is make sure that you contact trace. Send them home, right? Contact trace. Now, who is that person come into contact with? You want to document all those things to be able to show we took all the right action, all the required action to make sure that we maintained a safe work environment. And doing that will put you in the best possible position to avoid any potential liability. And the other aspect of this, and I think what concerns all of us that have a business, is that you want to contain any kind of infection like this, because the last thing you want beyond just the concern of actual liability is your workers or people that you're responsible for getting sick. And then, not only do you have the health concerns, but you have the issue of now my projects aren't going to be getting done, or key people that I need are going to be sick and not able to work on our projects. So for all those reasons, it is crucial to make sure that you're maintaining a very safe work environment, consistent with all the requirements of the CDC, the state, and the local jurisdiction that you're working in, and that you make sure you can show and document that you've done all of those things. And I think if you do those things, you'll be in the best possible position to avoid any potential claims or liability as it relates to an infected worker. Okay, the final aspect of our presentation with Mike and Chad, we're going to talk about project impact costs, COVID, and what you can do to effectively implement a claim management plan. And so with that, I will thank all of you. I'll be happy to answer any questions when we get to the end of the presentation, or if you want to shoot an email to me, I'm absolutely happy to do that. But with that, I will turn it over to Mike Pasco to kind of take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And a shameless plug for next week's presentation on safety measures in the workplace to further address what Rob just raised as potential issues and impacts. You can go ahead and fill out that slide, Aaron, take us to the last bullet point. As Rob said at the beginning of the presentation, for proper claim management, every single situation is different. Every single contract is different, and every single set of circumstances is different. The key thing that we say is to keep the lines of communication open. Projects go well, and nobody worries about that. But as Rob has said, a best practice is to be more aggressive, to over-document, to over-communicate. And I have never in my career had a case come across my desk where I've said to myself, wow, this is over-documented, there's too many letters. The key especially in situations like this where we are in a unique set of circumstances, is to keep those lines of communications open and to keep a dialogue open about what the actual impacts are in as real time as possible. So next slide, please, Aaron. You can fill this one out as well. Just some of the practical impacts of the shelter-in-place orders and the social distancing and things like that. These are issues to consider when, if you've been under a stop work order and you're getting back to work, or you have a project that is starting to be impacted and you're doing an initial assessment of that impact, all things to consider when you're providing notice upstream of a potential claim. Now, one of the things that we get pushback on is a statement from clients saying, well, I don't know what the impact is. I mean, how can I make a claim? How can I make an assessment of what the impact is if I don't know? And our response always is, well, there's an impact, and these are the things to consider. And we encourage clients immediately, even if it isn't a necessarily strict time requirement in a contract, but to document all of the potential impacts, to identify the issues and to raise them so that you start an open dialogue and you're keeping either your upstream contractor or your owner aware of what all the potential impacts are. And the reason is it really allows them also to make the decisions they have to make about potential, suspension of a project or even, termination for convenience, as Rob had said. Next slide, Aaron. In situations like this, everyone is impacted. Lenders, owners, future occupants of the project. And the key concern we're starting to see is worry about inconsistencies in position, where as the general contractor, oftentimes you're advocating up to the owner for impact claims from your subcontractors, and you're also advocating for your own claims. And so you want, when you're doing an assessment of your claim and impact on your project, you want to make sure that you're taking into account all of the potential consequences, and not only what that's going to do upstream, but also downstream. Next slide, Aaron. So generally speaking, what are we seeing from owners? As expected, just universally, people are invoking what are called act of God or force majeure provisions. Oftentimes these are explicit in contracts, but if they're not in your contract, all is not lost. Most states have law on force majeure or situations like this that would allow a relief from contract performance. We're also getting contractors claiming impossibility of performance or impracticability, depending on certain circumstances, and we'll cover some of those examples. Generally speaking, though, owners are resisting claims for additional time and money. They're arguing that other projects are working, that there is available labor, that people are proceeding. Even in states like Pennsylvania, which has one of the harshest restrictions on construction projects, really limiting them only to medical facilities and necessary infrastructure, we're still having owners saying, well, our project is essential because it assists with infrastructure, or it assists with supply chain for healthcare or hospitals or something along those lines. We're seeing really a pretty consistent pushback from owners for any kind of additional compensation. So let's talk a little bit about, next slide, Aaron. What is an impossibility of performance defense and how you want to put one of those together. The general concept is that there's an unforeseen circumstance arising through no fault of any party to the contract that renders the performance impossible. Examples are, as Rob had noted, being aware of inability to get materials or inability to get labor or inability to maintain a schedule. It just may get to a point where on a project you have to provide notice upstream to your owner that this is beyond a simple slowdown, that there just is no labor or there are no materials available through no one's fault. Next slide, Aaron. Another example of impossibility of performance is government action. And as I mentioned, Pennsylvania has had a very sweeping restriction on construction and all but the most essential hospital and infrastructure needs. Some states do allow this as an impossibility defense. Some states defer to contract language, and just as a caution, some states actually place the burden on the performing party to take the risk of governmental interference with a contract. And so it's important, if you are in a state where there is a governmental restriction, to know both what your contract says and what your state-specific law is if you're going to try and assert an impossibility of performance defense. Next slide, Aaron. So the next concept is impracticability of performance. And this is a situation where it's not impossible to perform it, but where you have a situation where the risk of injury from continuing the performance is disproportionate to the benefit of the contract. And the practical places we're seeing this are aspects of construction that require team lifting or team placement, like drywall or masonry work. For example, we had a construction contract where a masonry subcontractor just simply noted that they couldn't work because they were required to be within 6 feet of each other, and had to explore additional options for a device called a mule, which is a lift assist device for placing masonry block, and various other aspects that essentially, when you evaluate the impact, while it may not be impossible, it rises to the level of impracticability. Now, it's important to note that impracticable does not mean it's just slightly more difficult or it's slightly more expensive, but just where it really is, well, it may not be impossible, just impractical to continue. Next slide, please, Aaron. So, and you can fill this one out, Aaron. A lot of the key contracts we talked about, force majeure, these are contract provisions that you want to make sure you're fully familiar with. One of the things that we suggest our clients do in every situation where they get into an issue where they may have claims is to create a claim matrix and also a flow chart, so that they have an idea in assessing their contract, what exactly they have to do, when they have to do it, what their rights are, what entitlement they have, and how they're going to allocate the risk and the impact of, for instance, in this case, extended time, extended costs for protective equipment, and various other things. So next slide, Aaron. The key thing that we tell clients in situations like this is that you have to send written notice as early as you possibly can. Even if the provision in your contract, if you have a force majeure provision and it's explicit, and we see this on a significant number of occasions where the contract provision is explicit that it allows just time and not money, we still recommend clients actually send the written notice, even if you're just simply requesting an equitable adjustment to the contract price. One of the other things we recommend people watch out for is provisions in a contract that will waive your rights if you proceed without notice. And so we'll see language in contracts that says performing work without a written change order waives all of your rights. If you do get into a situation, and we see this a lot on project sites, where you're on the site and you're saying, I need a change order or I need a change directive, and you get just this direction to proceed or a threat to hold you in breach. If you are in a situation where you have to proceed, make sure that you're giving written notice that you're proceeding under protest, that you're reserving rights, and that you're going to track all your time and costs and materials and submit that for reimbursement. Next slide. You also want to evaluate, next slide when you have a second, Aaron. You also want to evaluate whether you can actually proceed. Are you in a situation, if you're a lower tier contractor, where you need something from your upper tier? Is there an impact in your portion of the work such that you can't proceed? Is there an engineering issue? Does something have to be designed, or is there a change in process to comply with new safety requirements? I mean, the perfect example is that is team lifting or setting a block. Do you have to change the way that work is sequenced? I mean, make sure that if you're proceeding, that that you are not in a position where you're accepting responsibility beyond your contract. If there are design obligations that are outside your contract, that you're not proceeding forward until you have everything that you need. Again, we're recommending as well, next 2 bullet points, Aaron, that you make sure that you're maintaining your lien and bond right claims to secure funds, and that you are getting documentation from either your owner or your upstream contractor so that you could bill for any additional work or costs. Next slide. So some of the delays that we're actually seeing in practicality, we're seeing employees just refusal to perform due to quarantine or an inability to prosecute a project, inability for lower tier contractors to obtain labor, general slowdowns, and various other impacts in the work. All of these delays, next bullet point, should be documented and passed on to the owner. Next. And again, just sort of an outline of how we document those claims. We do recommend, if you are in a situation where you give an initial notice and you have explained to an owner, we're not sure of what our impact and delay and costs are going to be, that you're providing regular updates on a weekly basis of what the actual costs are. And then also consider what the potential impacts are if you are delayed. I mean, are you pushed into to different weather that's going to render your performance impossible? Are you going to be pushed into a higher demand season where you're going to be unable to secure labor? All of these things are, as Rob mentioned in his portion of the presentation, being proactive and doing the assessments of what is the availability going to be, what is the supply chain going to be, where are you going to be when it does actually come for you to perform your work, and what are the impacts of that. Next slide. And finally, the key here is that when you are submitting your claim, however you're characterizing it, the key is to make sure it aligns with the language of your contract, and that you have set forth in any of your claims a clear and defensible way to proceed forward, to justify your additional costs, mitigate where you can, and then make sure that you're protecting your rights. I'm going to turn this over to Chad to talk about some of the tracking and record keeping for claims and situations. Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And a lot of the next several slides build on what both Rob and Mike have been saying. There is a lot of content here. I know that we are getting close on time, so I will try to run through as quickly as I can, but I do offer that if there's anything specific that anyone would like to discuss following this presentation, please feel free to reach out. There'll be contact information as we get towards the end of the slides. But really, this goes back to the basics of just construction management best practices. The critical tracking and record keeping are just the similar critical record and record keeping that's required on any project. It's knowing your schedule, knowing your budgeted costs, your actual costs, production rates, and then obviously understanding that COVID-19 has triggered some sort of delay or some sort of cost impact that we need to start documenting against. The hope is that you can get some related tracking techniques out of this. The importance here is to understand that things are to be tracked in real time. I would suggest that you have tailored cost coding for specific COVID-19 related items. And then obviously, has been stressed by Rob and Mike both, communication is key without question. Next slide, Aaron. So some time and cost components for COVID-19 claims will obviously include schedule delays, unexpected project factors we could talk a little bit more about, and really there's a couple, I guess we'll call it larger buckets of where costs are allocated. You have direct costs related to labor, material, subcontractor costs, and indirect costs, which is the component there of job site overhead, staffing, general conditions, and your extended home office overhead. Next slide. So talking about triggering some of these impacts, there's obviously delays that are being experienced on both sides here, delays that are on the owner's side, delays that are on the contractor's side. What's important here is to understand that, and we'll go through in a little bit of detail that there's really a project that is underway, that's progressing and has a suspension. There's certainly specific costs that can be tracked against that. And then there's obviously costs that are specific to projects that were intended to start but have yet to start because of this issue. May experience construction administration issues and will likely experience disruptions in work, labor efficiencies, etc. If you go to the next slide, we talk a little bit about some of the contractor or subcontractor costs that might be experienced or delays that are experienced. Procurement delays, can you get the material that was expected to be there when you actually need it? All related to construction delays and creating, some sort of inability to prosecute the work or an impeded ability to prosecute the work. Obviously, we've talked about refusal of employees coming to work, and certainly, as has been the indication in the construction industry for some time now, there's labor unavailability and shortages. Next slide, please. So we talked about some some delay components that are related to projects underway, progressing, and have been officially suspended. Obviously, a lot of content is in front of you on these slides. My intent here is just to run through that we just need to be cautious or cognizant that we do have costs that in this situation are related to the shutdown and securing the job site. I highly suggest that you keep a log, a spreadsheet, you track in real time, you have man count, head count, take photos of the situations, understand that there's costs related to demobilize people, equipment, materials. There's costs potentially for security services that might need to be added, and there may be public safety costs to maintain barricades or sidewalk closures or whatever the case may be. Next slide. Aside from just securing a job site that's been suspended, you have remobilization costs, costs to reset the project up, and also think about idle manpower and idle equipment. Both start with a documented start date and an end date that have some sort of idle period that's there. Understand those things. Understand the critical path that's impacted, the scheduled activities that are impacted by manpower and equipment being idle. The other thing here is just to understand that, of course, with the critical path impact, you really need to have regular schedule updates that show this. The justification to a delay on the project schedule and which triggers a change order is certainly going to have to rely on an analysis that's performed for critical path impact. So idle manpower, idle equipment all play into those factors. Next slide, please. So those are certainly some costs for projects that are underway but have been suspended. There are costs for projects that haven't started yet, and this pushes the timeline into doing work, performing work that has fallen into different weather conditions or different construction restrictions. We'll obviously experience material escalation, labor escalation could be in there. What's the wage rate period that now you're pushed into? And those type of factors certainly weigh into it. And I know we're running real short on time, so I know we're running through these things pretty quickly, but again, I offer any contacting afterwards, please feel free to do so. There's a couple slides here that we've got on loss of productivity. So certainly, not that we have to read everything that's on the screen, but it is a major cost factor. There's certainly an established production rate that crews are seeing before this pandemic has occurred. It's important to understand that that is a baseline and can be compared to, the production rates that we're seeing right now with impacted work, production rates that we'll see once the pandemic is slowed down or on the downside of the pandemic. And then when things are cleared, we're likely going to see continued production rate issues. What's important to understand with loss of production, and this will kind of summarize the next couple of slides, is you need to understand what percentage of work and what man hours account for that percentage of work that could be completed. Have an actual real life example of what you have proven to be productive in the field before the pandemic has occurred, and then compare that to what has transpired over the course of the pandemic. And those comparisons, equate to some sort of cost factor. And I don't know if we want to continue going through the balance or if we want to open up for questions, but I'm certainly happy to, keep talking. I'll let Eric or Rob chime in on that.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Chad. I know we're kind of up against it, and we did have a handful of questions, and maybe I'll just throw in one, just because we did say we get there, and it seems like an issue that I'll run into, that a number of our participants they may run into. If they're on a job site, and you touched on this a little bit, and Mike, Chad, Rob, whoever here, if you're on a job site and the work requires people being closer than 6 feet, and maybe that the owner is pretty tight on it, says, hey, regardless of the work, you guys got to get off the site, or what have you. What kind of options do you have? Is this just a situation in which you document a lot? I mean, can you just give us maybe a real quick overview on this, and we can get into some more details offline with that question? But I thought that would be one good question to hit before we wrap up.
It's a great and important question, Eric, and actually we're getting it a lot. And I can tell you both from the owner perspective, where we've represented owners on larger projects right now, and they've got crews and contractors saying, we're not working because we can't maintain those health and safety guidelines. And we're saying, oh, yes, you can. You got to get back out here. But it is incumbent, obviously, at the end of the day, it's very much environment specific. If you cannot maintain that 6 feet requirement and you can show that, then it's a problem. And frankly, it's a problem for the owner, because now you've got an owner trying to force people to come onto a site in violation of what are health and safety guidelines. So I think from a contractor's perspective, you got to document it. If you think your crews are in jeopardy and it's an unsafe environment, you got to take action, and you got to put the owner on clear written notice of that fact, so that you can protect your rights. But then you got to protect your workforce. And at that point in time, you don't come back on site until the owner has that site in a condition that you can actually fulfill those requirements. And that's exactly what you say in writing. We are ready, willing, and able to perform our work, but we cannot and will not do it until you provide a safe work environment.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, no, that's great advice. Just generally speaking, this entire presentation has been outstanding. So I want to thank Han Lozier. I want to thank Rob. I want to thank Mike. I want to thank Chad for participating here. I know we're kind of up against it time-wise here too, but because of that, the slides will be included in the follow-up email. So take a look out for that. You guys should get an email coming probably the next day or two. So be patient there. If you have any questions or you haven't received it, feel free to reach out to me or anyone in this group below. They'll also be able to help you with any follow-up questions that you may have specifically. And not to be lost on this, Han Lozier was offering and is still offering a free consultation to payroll for construction and foundation clients. So again, we can't thank them enough here at Foundation Software for what they've done content-wise and what they've been able to provide, just from a huge benefit from that consultation side. So another huge thank you to everyone over there. And then for everyone who enjoyed this or got some good value out of this, I'd encourage you to come next week, May 6th. We are already in May coming up here soon. I know it seems crazy, but May 6th at 1 o'clock, you'll see another email coming out, and that'll be, as Mike kind of teased a little bit earlier in the presentation, that'll be on the employment and OSHA there. So you'll see a lot of familiar faces. Hopefully that helps. And like I said, any specific questions, reach out to us below. And thanks for joining, guys.
Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks, everyone.